The Glass of Milk by Manuel Rojas. Propped on the starboard rail, the sailor seemed to be waiting for someone. A bundle wrapped in white paper, grease-spotted, was in his left hand. His right tended his pipe. From behind some freight cars, a thin youth appeared. He paused a moment, looked out to sea, and then walked on along the edge of the wharf with his hands in his pockets, idling or thinking. When he passed in front of the ship, the sailor called out to him in English, "I say, look here!" The youth raised his head, and without stopping answered in the same language, "Hello, what? Are you hungry?" There was a brief silence during which the youth seemed to be thinking, and took one shorter step as if to stop, but then replied, smiling feebly at the sailor, "No, I'm not hungry, thanks, sailor." "All right." The sailor took his pipe from his mouth, spat, and replacing it, looked away. The youth, ashamed that he had seemed to need charity, walked a little faster, as if afraid he might change his mind. A moment later, a gaudy tramp with a long blond beard and blue eyes, dressed in odd rags and oversized torn shoes, passed before the sailor, who without greeting called to him, "Are you hungry?" He had not yet finished the phrase when the tramp looked with shining eyes at the package the sailor held in his hand and answered hurriedly, "Yes, sir, I am very much hungry." The sailor smiled. The package flew through the air and landed in the eager hand. The hungry fellow did not even say thanks, but sat right down on the ground, opened the still warm bundle, and happily rubbed his hands as he saw what it contained. A poor loafer might not speak English well, but he would never forgive himself if he didn't know enough to ask for food from someone who did speak it. The youth who had passed by first had stopped nearby and had seen what happened. He was hungry too. He had not eaten for exactly 3 days, 3 long days, and more from timidity and shame than from pride he refused to wait by the gangways at meal times, hoping the generosity of the sailors would produce some package of leftovers and bits of meat. He could not do it. He would never be able to do it. And when, as just now, someone did offer him a handout, the boy refused it heroically, though he felt his hunger increase with the refusal. He had been wandering for 6 days around the side streets and docks of that port. An English vessel had left him there after bringing him from Punta Arenas, where he had jumped a previous ship on which he had served as captain's mess boy. He had spent a month there helping an Australian crabber, and then stowed away on the first ship bound north. He was discovered the day after sailing, and put to work in the boiler room. At the first large port of call, he had been put off, and there he had remained, like a bale without a label, without an acquaintance, without a penny, and without a trade. As long as the ship was in port, the boy managed to eat, but after that, the great city that rose up behind the back streets with their taverns and cheap inns did not attract him. It seemed a place of slavery, stale, dark, without the grand sweep of the sea. Among its high walls and narrow streets, people lived and died, bewildered by agonizing drudgery. The boy was gripped by the fascination of the sea, which molds the most peaceful and orderly lives as a strong arm a thin rod. Although very young, he had already made several trips along the coast of South America on various ships, doing odd jobs and tasks and odd jobs, which were almost useless on land. After the ship left him, the boy walked and walked, hoping to chance upon something that would enable him to live somehow until he could get back to his home grounds. But he found nothing. The port was not very busy, and the few ships that had work would not take him on. The docks were swarming with confirmed tramps, sailors on the beach, like himself, who had either jumped ship or fleeing some crime, loafers given to idleness, who kept alive no one knows not how, by begging and stealing, spending their days as if they were the beads of some crime or rosary, waiting for who knows what extraordinary events or not expecting anything, people of the strangest and most exotic races and places, and even some in whose existence one doesn't believe until one sees a living example. The following day, convinced that he could not hold out much longer, the youth decided to resort to any means to get some food. Walking along, he found himself in front of a ship that had docked the night before, and was loading wheat. A line of men, heavy sacks on their shoulders, shuttled away from freight cars, across the gangplank, to the hatchways of the ship's hold, where the stevedores received the cargo. He watched for a while until he dared speak to the foreman, offering his services. He accepted and enthusiastically took his place in the long line of dock workers. During the first period of the day, he worked well, but later he began to feel tired and dizzy. He swayed as he crossed the gangplank, the heavy load on his shoulder. Unseen at his feet, the opening between the side of the ship and the thick wall of the wharf, at the bottom of which the sea, stained with oil and littered with garbage, lapped quietly. There was a brief pause at lunchtime, and while some of the men went off to a nearby eating place, the others ate what they had brought. The boy stretched out on the ground to rest, hiding his hunger. He finished his day's work completely exhausted, covered with sweat at the end of his rope. While the laborers were leaving, the boy sat on some stacks watching for the forlorn, and when the last man had gone, approached him, confused and shuddering, he asked, without explaining what was happening to him, if he could be paid immediately, or if it were possible to get an advance on his earnings. The foreman answered that it was customary to pay at the end of the job, and that it would still be necessary to work the following day in order to finish loading the ship. One more day. On the other hand, they had never paid a cent in advance. But, he said, if you need it, I could lend you about 40 cents. That's all I have. The boy thanked him for his offer with an anguished smile and left. Then the boy was seized by acute despair. He was hungry, hungry, hungry. Hunger doubled him over like a heavy broad whiplash. He saw everything through a blue haze, and he staggered like a drunk when he walked. Nevertheless, he would not have been able to complain or to shout, for his suffering was deep and exhausting. It was not pain, but anguish, the end. It seemed to him that he was flattened out by a great weight. Suddenly he felt his entrails on fire, and he stood still. He began to bend down, doubling over forcibly like a rod of steel, until he thought he would drop. At that instant, as if a window opened before him, he saw his home, the view from it, the faces of his mother, brothers, and sisters. All that he wanted and loved appeared and disappeared before his eyes shut by fatigue. Then, little by little, the giddiness passed and he began to straighten up, while the burning subsided gradually. Finally he straightened up, breathing deeply. 1 more hour he would drop unconscious to the ground. He quickened his step as if it were fleeing another dizzy spell, and, as he walked, he made up his mind to eat anywhere, without paying, even if they shamed him, beat him, sent him to jail, anything. The main thing was to eat, eat, eat. 100 times he mentally repeated the word eat, 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 until it lost its meaning, leaving his head feeling hot and empty. He did not intend to run away. He would simply say to the owner, "Sir, I was hungry, 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 and I can't pay. Do what you want." He came to the outskirts of the city, and on one of the first streets he found a milk bar. It was a small, clean, and airy place with tables and marble tops. Behind the counter stood a blonde lady in a very white apron. He chose that place. There were few passer-by. He could have eaten at one of the cheap grills near the wharves, but they were always full of people who gambled and drank. There was only one customer in the milk bar. He was a little old man with glasses, who sat reading, his nose stuck between the pages of a newspaper, motionless as if glued to his chair. On the little table there were half an empty glass of milk. While he waited for him to leave, the boy walked up and down the sidewalk. He felt the burning sensation in his stomach. Returning little by little, when he waited 5, 10, up to 15 minutes, he grew tired and stood to one side of the door, from where he cast glances like stones at the old man. What the devil could he be reading with such attention? The boy even imagined the old man was his enemy, who knew his intentions and decided to frustrate him. He felt like entering and saying something insulting that would force the old man to leave, a rude word or phrase that would show him he had no right to sit there, reading for an hour for so small a purchase. Finally, the client finished what he was reading, or at least interrupted it. He downed the rest of his milk in one gulp, got up slowly, paid, and walked toward the door. He went out. He was a stoop-shouldered old man, probably a carpenter or a varnisher. Once on the street, the old man put on his glasses, stuck his nose in the paper again, and walked slowly away, stopping every 10 steps to read more closely. The youth waited until he was some distance away, and then entered. For a moment the boy stood by the entrance, undecided, not knowing where to sit. Finally he chose a table and walked toward it, but halfway there he changed his mind, walked back, tripped over a chair, and finally installed himself in a corner. The lady wiped the table with a rag, and in a soft voice that had trace of Castilian accent, asked him, "What will you have? A glass of milk?" "Large?" "Yes, large." "Is that all?" "Are there any biscuits?" "No, vanilla wafers." "Well, vanilla wafers." Then the lady had turned away. He wiped his hands on his knees, rejoicing, as if he were cold about to drink something hot. The lady returned and placed before him a large glass of milk and a dish full of vanilla wafers. Then she went back to her place behind the counter. His first impulse was to drink the milk in one gulp, then eat the vanilla wafers, but he immediately changed his mind. He felt the woman's eyes were watching him with curiosity and attention. He did not dare look at her. He felt that if he did, she would guess his situation and his shameful intentions, and he would have to get up and leave without touching what he had ordered. Slowly he took a vanilla wafer, and moistening it in the milk, he took a bite. He took a sip of milk, and he felt the burning in his stomach diminishing, dying away. But he became aware of the reality of the desperate situation at once, and he felt something tight and hot well up inside, choking him. He realized he was about to cry, to sob aloud, and although he knew that the lady was looking at him, he could neither hold back nor undo the burning knot of tears that grew tighter and tighter. He fought it, and as he fought he ate hurriedly, as if frightened, afraid that crying would keep him from eating, and he would when he had finished the milk and those wafers, his eyes clouded and something hot rolled into his nose and into the glass. A terrible sob racked his whole body. He held his head in his hands, and for a long time he cried with rage, cried with shame, crying as if he had never cried before. He was hunched over and crying when he felt a hand caress his tired head, and a woman's voice with a sweet Castilian accent say to him, "Cry, son, cry." Again his eyes filled with tears, and he cried as intensely as before, but this time not with pain but with joy. He felt a great refreshing sensation spread across him, extinguishing the hot something that nearly strangled him. As he cried, it seemed as if that his life and feelings were ceased like glass under the stream of water, recovering from clearness and firmness of former days. When the crying spell passed, he wiped his eyes and face with his handkerchief, feeling relieved. He raised his head and looked at the lady, but she was no longer looking at him. She was gazing out at the street, at a distant point in space, and her face seemed sad. On the table before him there was another glass of milk and another dish heaped with vanilla wafers. He ate slowly without thinking about anything, as if nothing had happened to him, as if he were home and his mother were that woman who was standing behind the counter. When he finished it had grown dark, and the place was lit by an electric light. He remained seated for a while, wondering what he would say to the lady when he left, without thinking of anything appropriate. At last he got up and simply, "Thank you very much, ma'am. Good-bye." "Good-bye, son," she answered. He went out. The wind blowing from the sea refreshed his face, still hot from weeping. He walked about aimlessly for a while, then went down to the street that led to the docks. It was a very beautiful night, and large stars gleamed in the summer sky. He thought about the blonde lady who had treated him so generously, resolving to repay her, to reward her as she deserved, when he got some money. But these thoughts of gratitude vanished from the burning of his face until not one remained, and the recent event receded and was lost in the recesses of his past life. Suddenly he surprised himself humming. He straightened up happily, strode on with assurance and determination, came back to the edge of the sea, and walked back and forth with a spring in his step. He felt like a new man, as if his inner forces, previously scattered, had reassembled and united solidly. Then he sat down on a pile of burlap sacks. Fatigue, like a tingling sensation, climbed up his legs. He looked at the sea. The lights of the wharf and ships spread over the water in a reddish gold temple, trembling softly. He stretched out on his back, looking up at the sky for a long time. He did not feel like thinking or singing or talking. He just felt alive. That was all. Then he fell asleep with his face toward the sea.